gives us that perfect father too. And it sounds like Truett was that kind of image for you
very much
of kind of
so.
cleaning up some of the baggage of that. Is
And the
that
cool
fair?
thing is, too, it also helped lead to, there was a period in my life where my dad and I probably didn't have the best relationship, but we reconciled later in life. And so it didn't end that way.
Which happened in
But
October
around
Sky.
college. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
he actually
October
he actually
Sky.
he actually comes out and sees him
Yeah.
launch the rocket at the
But
end.
I think a lot of the relationship with Truett helped enable that to happen.
Yeah. That's interesting because that describes almost your journey right there. Describes October Sky. It's almost like, the relationship with the dad, not really connecting, being misunderstood, but then ultimately having a dream, which sounds like Chick-fil-A for you.
Yes.
And then having the mentor of and the kind of father figure of that, and then being able to launch this rocket. And I one of the things that's interesting to me about October Sky is that the end, I don't know if you remember this, but he actually invites his dad over to launch the rocket.
Oh, yes.
It's not just that his dad's there. Obviously, him showing up is important. But the fact that he actually invites his dad to press the button. Was there ever that moment with you and your dad where it was almost like you kind of invited him back in and it was a part of pressing the button of your dreams?
That's a good question, Brian. I don't remember a specific moment like that.
Yeah.
But it was more of a gradual reconciliation than like a moment in
Right.
time.
Not a Hollywood kind of
Yeah, it wasn't a Hollywood kind of thing. But the good news is, there was a gradual, and we ended on really good terms. So,
well, and that's Field of Dreams too, in a certain sense, right? You
Yeah.
know, where he finally gets to meet his father at the end. You do have a lot of father things in this. George Bailey's father dies. And the one thing that I thought was an outlier a minute ago was A Christmas Story, but now A Christmas Story kind of makes sense to me in relationship to the father thing because he really is chasing after his father, kind of approving this BB gun, right?
Yes.
Does that make any sense to you at all?
yeah. It's fascinating that this comes out, but one of the things that really impacted me and Lynn early in our lives is we went to a Jewish bar mitzvah. One of our neighbors had a bar mitzvah, and I've got two boys, as you know, and a daughter. But the oldest boy at the time was like 5 or 6 years old. And we came back from that bar mitzvah, and we were just totally taken by that ceremony. But the moving part of it was the boy wrote a letter to his father talking about the things he saw in his father and mother's life that he thought he'd want to emulate in his own life. And the parents wrote a letter to the boy talking about things they saw in his life and things they saw in his future, and they read it to each other in front of the synagogue. And I just thought it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. So in the car going home, Lynn and I talked about it. I said, when Nick turns 13, I want to create kind of a version of that for Nick. And I thought, why don't we have in our Western culture this rite of passage for kids? It's like, a blessing for the kid. It's like almost every culture around the world. You go in the middle of Africa and they have a rite of passage, but not our Western culture. So I read a lot of books between that bar mitzvah and the time we did this on this idea, and one of them was called The Blessing. It's interesting you would use that word. And basically the message of the blessing was, if a boy doesn't get the blessing from their dad, doesn't feel the blessing from their dad, they'll spend the rest of their life looking for it in all the wrong places. They'll look for it in wealth and fame. They'll look for it in gangs. They'll look for it in drugs. They'll look for it in girls. They'll look for this hole that nothing else can fill. And it's got to be something that's clear and a moment in time. And so I didn't want either of my boys to not know they had the blessing of their dad. And I wanted it to be an arduous journey to get there, much like the bar mitzvah, but I also wanted there to be a moment in time. Exactly. So we had a moment in time where he felt the blessing of his dad, and with both the boys. And so now we want all dads to be able to easily access that. So that's one of the little projects I'm working on the side.
That's huge, yeah. and you just see it kind of resonating from your top 10, with Field of Dreams, that blessing was the thing that was passed at the end with him throwing the ball.
Exactly. In fact, there's a lot of, Braveheart, we got the speech where and Ultimate Gift, you've got that moment in time when that happens. And, It's a Wonderful Life. You have that moment in time where it all comes back and he feels the blessing of all these people.
Yeah, that's very true. Tell me about your book, Remarkable. I noticed there's an exclamation mark at the end of Remarkable.
Yes.
So it seems like that ties into a lot of these big change agents' legacy, significance.
Yes.
So tell me about the book and how that relates to that.
Yeah.
Like, what does remarkable mean?
Yeah. Well, remarkable as we use it means to mark the lives of the people we serve. And at the end of our life, to have done something worth remarking about.
There you go. Yeah, that's good.
But kind of the beginning of it, it's fascinating to me that most people spend their life working, and they view work as kind of a dirty four-letter word. In fact, for most people, their goal of work is to retire early. I'd say about 99% of the people out there, if they could retire early, that would be their goal of work. But when you think about it, what kind of goal is it if you're going to spend your whole life doing something that your biggest goal is to stop doing it? Yeah. And so I think we've kind of configured work in the opposite of the way God configured it. Yeah. And when you look in the Bible, the place that work shows up for the very first time is in Genesis 1. When God had everything exactly the way he wanted it, work was part of that equation. So what I derive from that is that work was designed to be something pleasurable, enjoyable, something that adds value to our lives, something that's rewarding, something that we enjoy doing. In fact, Truett used to say, if you love what you do, you'll never work another day in your life. And I feel like in the business world, the reason most people want to retire and the reason it's drudgery for most people is they spend their lives looking to extract value from other people. But the best businesses in my mind are those who spend their lives looking to create value for other people. And that's kind of the line in the sand. Yeah. If you work for a business that's just trying to extract value and suck everybody dry, and maximize your own profitability, and it's a win-lose proposition, all that, it will be a very desert experience for you to work. Yeah. But if your whole life is about creating value for other people and using the platform of business to improve the stories for those you do business with, that's an exciting place to be.
It's the difference between Oscar Schindler at the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie, right? Because he's just working, he's just doing the bidding, right? And then at the end of the movie, although, what do you think about the ending of Schindler's List? His lie at the end seemed to be, I haven't done enough.
Right.
And I think for people who are change makers, who are dreamers, there may be a sense in which they haven't done enough. Has that ever been a factor, where you've been like Schindler going, I wish I could sell this ring because this would have saved, these more people or whatever. Like, is there that sense in which there's not a finish line? Like, it's just it's hard because there's not a finish line?
I'd almost frame it a little differently. Okay. One of the biggest tensions I feel in life is that time is limited.
Yeah.
And the Bible talks about teach us to number our days. Because when we recognize that time is limited, it makes time more valuable to us. Yeah. And when we don't think it's limited, we waste a lot of time. Yeah. And my biggest frustration is wasting time.
Yeah, me too.
If I feel like I'm wasting time, I feel like I'm wasting my life. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse.
I totally
think
get it.
The recognition at the end of Schindler's List is a curse because he feels like he could have done more, but it's a blessing because he recognizes the richness of every minute and every second and every minute that we're given as a gift, and we ought to treat it that way, and every minute is valuable. Yeah. And so I don't like to waste time because it's the one thing in life we can't replace. Yeah. If I lose a car, I can replace it, a house, money, all this stuff, but I can't replace time that I wasted. So I feel like we need to view it as one of our greatest gifts and therefore steward it as one of our greatest gifts.
How long have you been with Chick-fil-A now?
35 years.
So 35 years. How in the world have you kept this startup mentality and kept this kind of dreamer mentality being here for 35 years? It seems like you would have fallen into institutional land so much earlier. I mean, even now it seems like you would just kind of view this as, well, gosh, I'm a part of this bigger institution, and remember the glory days of us being a startup. How in the world have you fought that draw towards the dark side of institutionalized thinking?
Boy, that's a great question. I wish I had as good an answer as the question, but part of it is a reflection of leadership. You know, Truett was a very entrepreneurial guy. Literally, at 93 years old, he started his newest restaurant concept at 93 years old.
So that was always a startup.
Truett's Luau, you know, and so he was always in startup. But Dan Cathy, his oldest son, who's now the CEO, has kind of that same entrepreneurial spirit. He's involved with everything from a movie studio to all kinds of things. So he's kind of got an entrepreneurial spirit. So we've got other people with that entrepreneurial spirit. But then also in my free time, get involved with a lot of startups. And the other thing is what it looks like to lead and grow a $7 billion business is very different than a $50 million business. So in a lot of ways, I haven't had the same job. Yeah. You know, it's like, you know, at
every
one point you're doing marketing for a $50 million, and now it's a $7 billion business. And, you know, at one point it was only malls, and now it's malls and freestanders and drive-through onlys and urban locations and soon to be international. And so the challenges keep changing as well. Yeah. If I'd just been doing the same thing the same way, it wouldn't be very...
you wouldn't still be here.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. What would you say, you know, since you said that Truett is kind of been this father-like figure that's inspired you to dream also. What I know people would be fascinated by that, you know, like for me, I would just want to go inside of that relationship and understand what was the thing that maybe he said to you that has shaped you most.
So it was the early 90s, and Boston Chicken had just gotten a big infusion of capital. They were about a 13-location restaurant chain, and almost overnight, that in the early 90s, almost overnight they grew to be as big as Chick-fil-A because they went public. They had this giant infusion of capital. They had investment bankers get involved, and they were as big as us in like 2 years. They grew from 13 to as big as us in the early 90s. So for the first time, Brian, we felt like we had legitimate competition going after the same market, high-quality chicken in what we would now call kind of a fast casual environment, that kind of thing, a real threat to Chick-fil-A. And so Dan Cathy in particular got very nervous about this. A lot of people were nervous about it. And it's like they're on the cover of every magazine, not just restaurant magazines, Fortune magazine, Business Week. They're like the next big thing. Wow. And they came out of nowhere. So Dan went to New York to investigate all these ways we could get bigger faster.
Interesting.
We looked at IPOs. We looked at borrowing a bunch of money, all this stuff. And he came back to report on this one day in a meeting. And I'll never forget. This was the moment. So Dan is all fire in the eyes, talking about how we're going to grow bigger and we're going to grow bigger faster. And by the way, Boston Market had talked about the fact they were going to be a $1 billion business by the year 2000. This would have been 92, 93, 94, something like that. Yeah. And that was way, way bigger than we were at the time. So anyway, Dan is reporting, fire in the eyes, and I was sitting next to Truett, kind of at the other end, and I could tell he's not happy about this. And in a very uncharacteristic fashion, at one point in Dan's, he beat his fist on the table, and he said, "Gentlemen, I am sick and tired of hearing you talk about getting bigger." He said, "We need to get better."
This is Truett.
And this is Truett.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Truett said, "Gentlemen, I am sick and tired of hearing you talk about getting bigger."
Yeah.
He said, "We need to be talking about getting better. And if we'll get better, customers will demand we get bigger." So as you might imagine, the total conversation changed at that point from how are we going to get bigger faster to how are we going to get better.
Wow.
Now here's the payoff. In the year 2000, when Boston Market was going to be a $1 billion business, do you know what was happening with Boston Market? They were in bankruptcy.
Oh, wow.
And in the year 2000, when Boston Market was going to be a $1 billion business, guess what happened at Chick-fil-A for the first time? We hit $1 billion.
Oh, wow.
And I could literally unpack that lesson for you for the next 2 hours about what I learned from that experience. But it's back to extract value, get bigger, versus create value, get better.
Yeah.
And just create so much more value that customers demand you get bigger. And so that's really been a moment that marked my life, because in almost every organization, they reach the point where they focus on getting bigger. Yeah. And that can actually be the beginning of the end for your organization, because what customers want is for you to get better.
Interesting. Wow, that's so strong, so strong. You know, and